Today's episode is brought to you by the Daily Gardener Friday newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about garden history and literature. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and today is October 10th. Well, I tell you what, it was a mighty cold weekend, and we are having what I am calling a No-Foolin fall. And that is a fall that does not mess around and gets ready for winter in a hurry and does not look back. You know, sometimes we have these cooler days in October and we look ahead and we say, oh, this is just a blip. We're going to have plenty of warm days. It does not look like we're going to have that kind of fall up here in Minnesota. Today and tomorrow, we're going to have very nice days. They're going to be in the 70s. And then after that, there's nothing but 40s and 50s in the forecast for the next 2 weeks. Yikes. So that means that I have today and tomorrow to get everything done in the Maple Grove garden. I did a ton of cleanup in the front. I always like to have the front cleaned up since it's a suburban garden. But now in the back, I have a lot of work to do. So my oldest son is coming down. We're going to redo all of the outdoor cafe lights. We're going to make sure that the back garden is ready for spring. I put in some new elevated beds and then they got painted and then nothing else happened with them. So those all have to get moved into position. There's pots to be organized by size and type. I like to get all of that done before it gets too cold out. And then the back deck where I have my kitchen garden is a holy mess. And so that has to get addressed as well. So just a little bit to do, and I have 48 hours to get it all done. I feel like I'm on one of those HGTV shows and the clock is ticking. It's just part of the joy of that No-Foolin fall. All right, let's get to today's garden history. It was on this day, October 10th in 1802, that George Pope Morris was born. He was an American editor, poet, and songwriter, and George co-founded the Daily New York Evening Mirror with Nathaniel Parker Willis. George and Nathaniel also started Town and Country magazine, and I like to think about this duo as the perfect partnership. George was more right brain, Nathaniel was more left brain. In fact, Nathaniel once wrote that George was just what poets would be if they sang like birds without criticism. Well, in 1837, George wrote one of the most popular nature poems ever to be written in the United States. It was a poem that became a song, and it was called Woodman, Spare That Tree. And both the poem and the song became a sort of anthem for people who loved nature and, of course, for the conservation movement. And I thought I'd share just a quick little excerpt from Woodman, Spare That Tree. It goes, "Woodman, woodman, spare that tree. Touch not a single bough. For years it has protected me, and I'll protect it now. Chop down an oak, a birch, a pine, but not this slippery elm of mine. It's the only tree my wife can't climb, so spare that tree." A great poem, a mighty poem to start us off today by George Pope Morris. Now, our next piece of garden history caused me to do a little bit of digging. I stumbled on a quote that was written by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and this quote is perfect for October. So if you're looking for a nature quote to go with a Halloween theme, this quote has your back. And here's what Samuel wrote on this day, October 10th, way back, almost 200 years ago in 1825. "Nature is a wary, wily, long-breathed old witch, tough-lived as a turtle and divisible as the polyp." Well, I understood the turtle reference, But the polyp made me question what I was reading. And the polyp that Samuel Taylor Coleridge is referring to in this quote is actually a water plant that was discovered by Abraham Tremblay back in 1740. And that year, old Abe was walking along a pool of water, and he saw what he called a polyp, or a hydra. And Abe was astonished when he saw the organism's response to being chopped into pieces, because it would simply regenerate into a new whole organism. And so now we have a greater appreciation for this nature quote by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Nature is a wary, wily, long-breathed old witch, tough-lived as a turtle, and divisible as the polyp. And today we also celebrate the birthday of Lin Yutang, the Chinese inventor, writer, and translator. He was born on this day, October 10th, double 10, in 1895, probably considered to be a lucky day in China. Lin Yutang's translations of Chinese classics became bestsellers in the West. That's how he became popular. And he once wrote of the seasons, "I like spring, but it is too young. I like summer, but it is too proud. So I like autumn best of all, because its tone is mellower, its colors are richer, and it is tinged with a little sorrow. Its golden richness speaks not of the innocence of spring, nor the power of summer, but of the mellowness and kindly wisdom of approaching age. It knows the limitations of life and its content." Lin Yutang on the seasons. And finally, today, we also celebrate the birthday of Helen Hayes MacArthur, the American actress who was born on this day, October 10th, in 1900. Helen Hayes MacArthur is remembered as the First Lady of American theater. She was the first person to win the Triple Crown of acting, an Academy Award, an Emmy Award, and a Tony Award. And you'll be pleased to know that in her spare time, Helen was also a gardener. Regarding wildflowers, Helen once said, "They won't bow to one's wishes. They don't want to be tamed. That must be the reason these darling, lovely little things won't cooperate." Well, a lot of people credited Helen's success as an actress with her passion and inner drive. But Helen actually found it was the time that she spent in her garden that was so restorative and powerful for her. And she wrote about it. She wrote, "All through the long winter, I dream of my garden. On the first warm day of spring, I dig my fingers deep into the soft earth. I can feel its energy, and my spirits soar." It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Garden as Art by Thaisa Way. This book came out this year in 2022, and the subtitle is Beatrix Farrand at Dumbarton Oaks. Well, if Thaisa's name sounds familiar to you, it is because she is the director of Garden and Landscape Studies at Dumbarton Oaks, and her book is one of two books that came out this year as part of the centennial celebrations at Dumbarton Oaks. This garden is now entering its second century, and so I see Thaisa's book as a commemorative book. This is a book that actually features the beautiful garden photography of Sahar Costin Hardy, and then along with the photography, There is a wonderful selection of essays that were handpicked to reveal the history of design in the garden and the significance of those gardens from a variety of different voices. So this is a very special book. If you're a fan of Dumbarton Oaks, then this book is an absolute must-have. And what I find especially wonderful about this book are the seasonal glimpses of Dumbarton Oaks that are offered by the photography that Sahar did. So seeing the transformation at Dumbarton throughout the year is really quite special. And if you're a fan of Beatrix and her work, then you know that Dumbarton is regarded as her crowning achievement. And this book is definitely a testament to that. Harvard published this book, and they write that the book invites the reader to contemplate the art of garden design and the remarkable beauty of the natural world. There are archival images of the garden that offer a chronicle of evolving design concepts. And the book also illustrates how gardens change over time as living works of art. And so that brings us to the title, Garden as Art. It offers an inspiring view of a place that has been remarkably influential in both design and the art of landscape architecture. This is a very special book. This would make a wonderful Christmas present for yourself as a gardener or for a gardener in your life. This book is 312 pages of one of our country's most beautiful gardens with a beautiful story to tell, featuring Beatrix Farrand and Dumbarton Oaks. You can get a copy of Garden as Art by Thaisa Way and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $42. Very special book. Finally, we end the show today with a Botanic Spark that celebrates a little notice that I found in a newspaper for this day back in 1817. And it said, on this day, October 10th in 1817, the garden of a Mr. Pringer, a maker of pants or breeches in the lovely town of Canterbury, showed off his apple tree to members of the public after the tree blossomed out unexpectedly in the middle of autumn. Accounts say that the tree was very lovely and full of blossoms. Well, the tree was no doubt a great curiosity to the locals in the community and to all who visited. And the papers noted that the garden thronged with people who traveled far and wide to see an apple tree bloom in the middle of October. Well, almost 200 years later, our gardens still manage to surprise us. Take the favorite, dependable plant that suddenly fails to perform and dies, or the unlikely success of a plant that shouldn't have survived the winter. And what about the seeds that surpass the profile on the packet, or the shrubs that spiral downward despite our ministrations? Or the flowers that defy the first snow. And to that list, I've added Mr. Pringer's apple tree in full bloom on this day, October 10th in 1817. And I share all of this with you to hopefully get you thinking about your own garden. What were the surprises in your garden this year? Well, my surprises were the lone apple that appeared on one of my newly planted apple trees in my mini orchard. I didn't expect to get any fruit. The young tree seemed barely strong enough to support it, but I have to say it brought a smile every time I walked by that tree. And another surprise that I had this year was the death of all 5 hydrangeas in my front garden in Maple Grove. It was just too hot this summer. They were new plants, and despite my sprinkler system and all of my extra watering, they just didn't make it. They could not get established in the heat. I also dealt with a new vigorous development in my water feature, in my pondless river, and that was string algae, something that was new to me. I've never dealt with it before. I have to say it was a worthy adversary and nearly impossible to eliminate. And I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do about my water feature in the spring because I don't want it to reoccur. And at the same time, I'm not very motivated to go out there and individually wash all of my rocks. I hope that's not what it takes. And then a final surprise was the hoped-for joy that I experienced weeding the front garden up at the cabin. After adding the sunken path late last summer, the front garden at the cabin is elevated. So now there is no more stooping or digging for weeds between the large boulders that line that path. And now it's a joy for me to tend that large 40 by 12 foot bed. It's actually one of the first things I do when I hop out of the car when I first get to the cabin. So surprises in the garden, both good and bad, but definitely, without a doubt, very memorable. Well, that's it for today's show. Thank you so much for listening to The Daily Gardener, and I hope you get to spend some time outside today and tomorrow, knocking out the last of your fall tasks during this No-Foolin fall, because it's not fooling. We have today and tomorrow to get our stuff done. And as always, don't forget that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. The next time you're over at Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community, where you'd search for a friend and then request to join. And if you'd like more of The Daily Gardener, you can subscribe to the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. And don't forget that you can also show your support for the show by using the Buy Me a Coffee link over at the website or in today's show notes. This is Jennifer Ebling. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day.